Welcome to the Safeguarding Podcast. In each episode, we'll discuss a different safeguarding topic with a range of expert speakers. Please be aware some of this content is sensitive and listener discretion is advised.
Hello, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name's Natasha Lawrence and I'm the Head of Safeguarding at the Safeguarding Company. I want to extend a very warm welcome to our lovely guest today, Mathilde Grenet, and hope that you're all able to join us this afternoon quite flawlessly. If you do have any issues, down to the bottom left-hand side of the screen on the bottom bar, there is a help button that should be able to assist you. And looking over to the right, there is also a question function as well. So please feel free to make any comments. We love hearing from you. And if we have the time, and if I'm able to, I will feed your questions into today's session. Any questions that we don't get time to answer, I will make sure that we answer those questions and send them out afterwards. So Mathilde, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Please introduce yourself and tell us all about yourself.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I'm very excited to be with all of you this afternoon. My name is Mathilde Grenet. I'm originally from Paris, France, but I'm now based in Lausanne, Switzerland. I'm a safe sports specialist, and I am the founder and CEO of the safeguarding consultant firm EN GARDE, whose mission is to work with sporting organizations to make their ecosystem safer for everyone, especially children. And I created EN GARDE because I was groomed and sexually abused by my coach during 2 years. And I later on realized that not enough was done at the club and at the federation level to prevent abuse from happening. I also learned so much from going through an 8-year legal battle against this coach. And he was sentenced to 18 years of jail in January 2021. I'm also a founding member of the French association Rebound, which works closely with the French Tennis Federation on fighting sexual violence in French tennis. And I am a member of the pool of international experts on safe sport at the Council of Europe. I've been working in the Olympic movement for the past 10 years. And with EN GARDE, I want to share the learnings that I've acquired through my personal battle. I want to make sport safer for children. I'm the first person convinced of the multiple benefits that playing sport can have for children if it's done in a safe way. With EN GARDE, I currently work with FIFA and European athletics on their safeguarding programs and more specifically on supporting their member federation in establishing their own safeguarding policies and procedures. Very honored to be on the safeguarding webinar today.
Thank you. Your story is inspiring, and you bring such value to these organisations that you're working with. You spoke about working with their policies and practices. Where have you identified maybe the most learning for these organisations? What I'm trying to get at is obviously you're working with these organisations. Where are the risks? Where are the areas where they need to sort of put in the resources to improve their standards?
The major risk for sport organization is, first of all, the risk of reputational damage. We've seen, for example, with the Larry Nassar case, the national team doctor who abused hundreds of gymnasts, the impact this case had on USA Gymnastics. They lost all of their sponsors. They even had to file for bankruptcy in 2018. And we know that now sponsors are much more regarding in terms of what is happening in corporate social responsibility matters and in human rights matters. We see also more and more senior leaders being accused of not dealing with safeguarding cases in the right way and having to resign. There are major legal risks for sporting organizations to face legal action. Victims from cases of harassment and abuse can press legal charges and seek for compensation for the damages they have suffered. I've read recently that UK Athletics, for example, spent £600,000 on handling safeguarding cases and is now facing great difficulty. The main mission of sport organization is to grow the sport, whether at the national level or at the international level. If participants suffer violence, if they don't have a good experience in sport, there is a chance that they leave sport. And nowadays, the entertainment industry is extremely competitive. So it is critical that sport organization address this issue. And the other main risk I see now is the fact that, especially in places like the UK that are more advanced in safeguarding, is the fact that more investment on safeguarding is done at the elite level, but almost no investment is done for the grassroots level, at the community level. And we know from research that most cases of harassment and abuse happen at this community level, at the club level. I hope this answers your question. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please forgive me. My fault. I skipped a question, didn't I, Mathilde? So I've
yes.
Yes. So yes, let's move on to if we can. So what does the current safeguarding landscape look like in sport in your world?
Yes, so we've seen recently in the last 10 years an explosion of high-profile cases of harassment and abuse cases in sports. And we know from research that these high-profile cases are just the tip of the iceberg. We know, for example, from the Council of Europe that 1 in 5 children in Europe are victims of some form of sexual violence. The Larry Nassar case that I've just mentioned earlier was one of the most shocking, traumatic case of harassment and abuse that we've seen recently. And it led the US Congress to legislate and to create the US Center for Safe Sport in 2017. In the UK as well, you've had your share of revelations. In football, with the disclosure from Andy Woodward saying that he had been sexually abused by his coach as a very small child in his football club, which then pushed hundreds of former players to come out and say they had also been a victim of sexual abuse. This led the English FA to commission an independent review, the Clive Sheldon QC review, which pointed out several malfunctions and a real lack of safeguarding policies and procedures. And these reviews have happened in different sports in the UK. I think they are really important. We've seen them also happening a little bit in Canada and in the US, maybe in Australia as well. So I think it's a very Anglo-Saxon, a very British thing, and it's really lacking in other parts of the world. So I think we can really learn in other parts of the world from these reviews, which I think are really a transparent way to do things and a brave way, in a way, to do things. So these reviews also, they really contributed to a safeguarding overhaul in the UK. They made recommendations, but for me, I think this wasn't the only reason why the UK is so much ahead in terms of safeguarding. I think a critical thing, a key measure, was the fact that the British government really stepped in and made it mandatory for British national governing bodies to implement safeguarding policy and procedures in order to be eligible for funding through UK Sport and Sport England. So I think for me, this was a really critical measure. And what they did is that they didn't say you need to do this and that, otherwise we will cut your funding. They also provide support, Sport England and UK Sport. They work with expert agencies such as the Child Protection in Sport Unit and the Anne Craft Trust to provide safeguarding guidance and resources for sport organization. So we can say that the UK are very much pioneers when it comes to safeguarding. It doesn't mean that the issue of harassment and abuse in the UK is solved, but because we see every day a new case coming out and people speaking out, but I think in a way it's not a good thing, because of course there were some victims involved, but it's a good thing in the sense that people are starting to really speak out, which means that the culture is slowly changing. From a more global perspective, safeguarding is also very much on top of the agenda of the International Olympic Committee and FIFA. They have developed safeguarding policies and guidelines to set minimum standards for their member federation to follow, and they are working hard on implementing these standards and providing education. The IOC is now asking their National Olympic Committee and International Federation to provide a dedicated safeguarding officer. They have launched in 2021 a new course, the IOC Certificate Safeguarding Officer in Sport, to train these officers. I've just finished this course. I've just been certified. It's already a great resource. They've also announced recently a 10 million fund to strengthen safe sports. And they have created a working group to decide how to allocate the money. The IOC is of the view that it is a global problem with local solutions. So they really want to invest the money into these local solutions. FIFA has a slightly different approach. They've been very vocal recently about creating an international safe sport entity. Also, after they had to deal with very difficult cases, and they felt like at the international federation level, there was not really the necessary expertise or resource to deal with difficult cases of harassment and abuse. So they decided to create this international safe sport entity, and to see if this project could be viable. They consulted with different groups, with international federation, with legal experts, with NGOs, and with a group of survivors. I was involved in this consultation as part of the group of survivors. And our main point as survivor was really to say that a key point for this entity would be to be trauma-informed and victim-centered, because we know in some of the recent cases, the high-profile cases that have happened in Afghanistan, in Haiti, that the victims were not protected. They faced retaliation. They often felt re-traumatized and betrayed by the sport organization. So we were very vocal about this.
May I ask, did that form part of the training you've just completed, that being trauma-informed?
Yes, there were several modules about this new. I think it's quite a new area of work for safeguarding that is coming from the medical world, and it's a very important point that sports organizations have to keep in mind when they design their safeguarding policies and procedure, to put themselves in the shoes of survivors or victims when they do that.
I think that's
sorry.
I was just saying, I think that's a really important point that you've just made about not re-traumatizing any adult survivors or victims at the time when going through this process. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes, no, sorry, that's the point. To be very careful about not re-traumatizing and be attentive to the type of support that a victim would need. This can be really critical and can really contribute to how a victim or a survivor heal, from the trauma they have suffered. So there are little things that can be done at the federation level to lower the trauma that has been suffered. And the other point I wanted to mention regarding the global landscape is is that we are seeing a lot of countries that are creating these safe sport entities. So I've mentioned the US with the US Center for Safe Sports, but we've seen a few European countries doing that: Switzerland, Belgium, Netherlands. And I think this is a very positive step. But it is not the unique solution. We see that these entities are often struggling with resources, that some of them were created more to deal with anti-doping and match-fixing issues, and not necessarily with safeguarding cases. So that's really a work in progress. And I think there needs to, the key point with this international safeguarding landscape is a need for collaboration and a need for every actor, from the club to the the International Olympic Committee to play their part.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may ask, you mentioned about the culture and safeguarding culture, and it's something that we talk a lot about in our training here at the Safeguarding Company. It's something that we've delved into quite a bit. For you, in your opinion, Mathilde, what would a good safeguarding culture in sport look like?
A good safeguarding culture. Sorry, I didn't hear your last word.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, for you, in your opinion, what would a good, positive safeguarding culture in sport look like?
Yeah, I think the key here is that we need to stop with this familiarity that exists in the sport world and that it doesn't exist, for example, in the education system. So people need to be much more respectful. Coaches and people working with children need to understand that this is not appropriate, for example, to offer a car ride to their athletes, something that a teacher, for example, would not do. Regarding communication, like a teacher, for example, would never text their pupil after class, and that's something that a coach does on a daily basis. So yeah, there needs to be a real shift, I think, in the sport culture, and we need to stop with this familiarity. Safeguarding needs to become the normal day-to-day of sport organization. I think now too many organizations think they have to tick the box by having a policy, but they need to understand that safeguarding efforts need to be consistent, need to happen all the time, every year, that safeguarding policies and procedures need to be reviewed and assessed also regularly.
I think that's a really important point, that it isn't just a tick box exercise, and that the culture and the practice permeates down from the top leadership down across all organizations. And I think it's fair to say that that is the same in education as well, that needs to come from the top and permeate through everything that is done with regards to that safeguarding culture and those practices. A safeguarding lead, whether in education or a sporting organisation, can be quite an isolated role. Who in your world can safeguarding leads turn to for maybe supervision, support, etc., advice?
Yeah, no, this is very true, and I think as a safeguarding officer, I do this role for European athletics, and this position can be quite lonely. And I would say that sport organizations need to be careful not to separate their organization too much from the safeguarding officer role. So the safeguarding officer really needs to have the right supervision and to be held accountable also for what they do. But I think for them, it's critical to build kind of a support network of organization and people they can call and talk to when they have a case and they are not sure how to deal with it. So I think in the UK, you have great organizations like the CPSU I mentioned earlier, Protection in Sport units, that provide all kinds of training resources and for sport organization. For the adults, you have the Handcraft Trust. And for the more international audience, I would say that there are not too many resources, but there is the International Safeguards for Children in Sport that was developed by a coalition between UNICEF and different sport organizations. They provide with a very useful framework with 8 safeguards to make sport environments safe for children. They have a great website with different tools, videos, accessible in I think 12 different languages. FIFA also developed a great course, FIFA Garden course, to support their member association safeguarding officers and member association federations in establishing their own safeguarding policy and procedures. This course is available in English, French, and Spanish, and now it's being adapted to a wider sport audience. I know that the level 1 is available. The IOC also has several resources. They have a platform, the 365 platform for athletes, where also they provide e-learning on safeguarding and interesting resources. They published a mental health in elite athlete guide in 2021. There is the course that I've just mentioned for safeguarding officer. And I was going to mention also the Council of Europe, which I'm a member of a group of experts there. They have also good safeguarding resources on their website, especially the ones that they developed for the Start to Talk campaign. So these are the places where I would turn to for information or call fellow safeguarding officers. But it's and of course another one that I didn't mention is local law enforcement. I know that's how the safeguarding company was created, out of this collaboration between the education system and local law enforcement. So that's really important also to have your contact with your local law enforcement, child protection agency that you can reach out to and talk to at any point.
Thank you. And for our listeners, we can supply those links, some of those links that Mathilde's just mentioned, following on from today's webinar. Please ask any questions in the box on the right-hand side. I will post them to, we've just got a question come in, and let me just see whether I can just bring the screen down so I can read the whole question, because it's quite a long question. Right. Okay, I'm going to read this one out. So, hi Mathilde, one issue I have as a sports psychology, how to support athletes who have been abused in the process of denouncing to the Sports Integrity Agency, as coaches and sports directors tend to recognize who the complaint is coming from despite anonymous treatment. What are the measures you would suggest to ensure athletes are safe in denouncing and not re-traumatized and marginalized for the sheer fact of having a denounced case?
Yes, no, that this is very common when an athlete speaks out, say that they have been abused, then they get ostracized in their sports environments. So in a case like this, it's extremely important to see if you can provide a different training setup for the athletes. So see if they can train maybe somewhere else for a while. Of course, different coach, different teammates, provide them with. So Matthias says that he's a sports psychologist. Of course, provide them with psychological support. Signpost them to different resources that could be helpful for them. And these are the main advice I would. I'm just trying to reread the question again. Yeah, and always tell them, that they are being believed, that they are safe, that they've done the right thing, that that's not their fault what happened to them. So.
Thank you. Going back, you mentioned about things that we do well in this country, and that is, you mentioned the Sheldon report, obviously our serious case reviews. We do reflect on the case, look at what's happened, look at how we can move forward and improve the system. So thinking about our UK education system, Mathilde, what do you think that the education system in this country does well, and that what aspects of that could be adopted within the sporting organisations and bodies?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I think safeguarding needs to become a little bit the new norm. Safeguarding is a normal day-to-day of every school, I think, in the UK, and that needs to happen in sports. As I said earlier, sport organizations really need to understand that safeguarding training it has to become systematic. It has to happen very consistently every year. Safeguarding policies have to be regularly reviewed and adapted. And I think the UK education system, they do a lot of things very well. I think they have very robust safeguarding policies and procedure covering all forms of non-accidental violence, including bullying and online safety, which are extremely common nowadays with social media. They also have implemented very robust vetting process, background check, and criminal record check. And I think this is happening also in the sports in sport in the UK, but in many parts of the world, this is not a standard practice to even conduct a background check, to call. So in my case, my coach, they had never checked his background. They had never called his previous employer. If they had done it, they would have realized that he didn't have the qualification he claimed he had. So just doing a background check is the minimum. I think in the UK education system, they spend a lot of time and energy on educating the teachers, the staff about how to recognize the sign and symptom of harassment and abuse, what to do when this happens, how to report it, how to support the victim. They have designated safeguarding leads in every school. This is yet to happen. I know in the UK, every club has one, but this is yet to happen in many countries where most countries, this doesn't exist. And I would say for one thing in the UK that's much better in at least than in France. I think in many countries that I think there is a great emphasis in British school on PSHE, personal, social, health, and economic education for kids. They are really educated from a very young age on questions such as healthy relationship, online safety, consent. I think this is really critical, this education piece. I have my son who is 2.5 years old. He's half British and he watches the CBBS. And I see even in the CBBS that a lot of attention is given to questions of inclusion, diversity, consent. And so I think this is great. And sport organizations have a role to play in making this education happen, this PSHE education. It's very important. And I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I think the collaboration with external entities such as law enforcement agency, child protection agency, I think it's really important because sport organizations don't have all the expertise to know how to deal with these cases. So they need to do that. And I think the schools and the education system in the UK, they do that well. And that's how they can safeguard children efficiently. And I often, that's what I was going to say, the parallel between the education system and the sports system. I try to make it all the time when I speak to federation, and I say it's not normal, that the coach shares a bedroom with an athlete on a competition. This should not happen. This would not happen in a school when they go on a camp. And so I think we have a lot of learnings to take from what's happening in the education world.
I think there's a comment just come in as well that this practice that we're talking about today also needs to be extended to dance and theatre clubs and other unregulated and unsupported arts groups. So I think that's a really valid point. Thank you for that. And let me just have a look at the questions before we go on. We've got another one here. I'll read out. So this one is from Gemma. I'm a safeguarding officer in the UK for local county FA. I'm developing our CPD program for welfare officers. I wondered if you are aware of any organisations that can provide education on safeguarding in sports topics through guest speakers. Thank you. Very interesting to listen to. Thank you very much, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Gemma, for this question. Let me reread it quickly. Yes, I mean, apart from the ones I mentioned, the programs from, you have Safe Sport International, that is a charity also based in the UK. They were one of the main organizations that pushed for the creation of the international safeguard for children in sports, and the initiatives that have been created by FIFA and by the IOC. I'm unfortunately not aware of other organization, but if myself with En Garde I can help you in any way, I'm happy to take this conversation outside of this webinar.
Thank you, Mathilde. Yeah, I think the unregulated training standard is something certainly I'm very passionate about here at the Safeguarding Company, and raising those standards around safeguarding training, whether that's in education and sporting organisations. And also coming to one of our core products at the Safeguarding Company, which is My Concern, which is our case management system. So Mathilde, you spoke about capturing these disclosures, capturing the ongoing actions around what is happening, how you're supporting the individuals in their disclosures. So in education, we're well embedded in My Concern within schools and this case management system. Do you think that would translate well into sporting organisations, having a similar system to support their case management and their capturing of low-level concerns right through to the more serious and complex?
Yes, no, I mean, I think it's a great tool, of course. I would say that for me, My Concern, the case management software, is a little bit the icing on the cake. And I think this first, the education work needs to be done. So people need to be educated about the existence of such a platform. They need to understand what is a safeguarding incident, what is a case of harassment and abuse, how they can report it, what will happen when they report it. I think this education is really often missing. I see some federation that do have a platform, but nobody knows about it. So I think that's a very important step, is to educate people about it, how to use it. But My Concern is a great tool. It's very easy to report a safeguarding incident. And it enables the safeguarding lead, the organization, to record everything in a safe, centralized, systematic, and consistent way, which is a difficult exercise when you don't have such a software. Then you have to be careful with data protection, confidentiality, how you save information. So it will really facilitate the work of safeguarding officers in sports governing bodies. I think it can help also understand the profile of the victim, of the perpetrators, and then inform future training, and can help also in identifying like trends and potentially intervene earlier before there are more serious issues.
Yes, thank you. Sorry if I'm missing any questions, but I've just spotted another one, and we might be jumping back and forth a bit here. Mathilde, have you seen the question that's come in from Madeline? How would you advise NGBs to ensure their safeguarding policy becomes part of their culture, particularly in relation to working with volunteer coaches who are time restricted and maybe don't see the importance of safeguarding? And I think this goes back to your point that you mentioned about these policies not being just in place for a tick box exercise. Have they actually been embedded across the whole area of the organization, including the volunteers, coaches, etc.?
Yes, no, that's the point. I guess it's the beginning to have your policy, but it's completely pointless if it's not being implemented, if people are not being educated about it. I think a way to engage well with volunteers and coaches is to try to organize a focus group with them, on writing code of conduct. That's a good practice also, to involve the coaches and the volunteers to write their own code of conduct, and also to educate them about how important it is for them even to be protected, to have robust safeguarding policies and procedures, because that's not only protecting the athletes and the sport participants, it's protecting them, from false accusation. So they need to understand that, the more professional we become, the safer also everybody will be.
I think that's a really important point, isn't it? It's including them in the process, making them part of that policy, not just being a tick box document, but something that is embedded in your everyday actions and practices. And I think that gives them a sense of ownership as well around that. One of the things we found when we've gone into schools and organisations that have the policies in place, and when you talk, let's talk at grassroots levels, not even knowing where to access those policies. So I think that's really important, really involving them in those.
Yeah.
Let me just check the questions here. I think we had another one around building trust in the process. So yes, how can athletes build trust in the process?
Yeah, how can athletes build trust? I think it's critical to involve athletes also in this process of working on establishing a safeguarding program, on developing policies. I think it's critical to have a working group made of athletes and made of people, like me, survivors who have had experience of abuse and who can really tell you what needs to change to make sports safer.
Yeah, thank you. So talking about yourself and your organisation En Garde, what kind of things can people expect to see when they visit your website, and what kind of support training services can you offer?
Yeah, so at En Garde, we provide 4 main services. So the first service is safeguarding audits. We've developed a methodology to assess the level of your organization's compliance with international safeguarding best practices. And out of this assessment, we make strategic recommendation. We do safeguarding education and training. We develop bespoke educational program and tools for your sport and your sport stakeholders. We do safeguarding risk assessment for sports environment and high performance sport environments. We do, of course, safeguarding advocacy. We speak to your sport community to inspire them to support a safe culture and to become a safeguarding leader.
Thank you. And the importance of the training, and I obviously mentioned about how passionate we are here about the quality of training. What kind of training can you offer maybe individuals or organizations, and what sort of level is that at?
Yeah, I really conduct any type of training for, it can be for coaches, for federations, board members. I really adapt myself. I have a full range of training courses available.
Well, that's really fantastic to hear. That's covering all bases then with regards to the training. We've just had another question come in. As you've shared your story with us, Mathilde, as a survivor, in hindsight, what are the major factors that were missing in sports organisations that allowed the unfortunate incident to take place?
So yeah, I would say, there was nothing. I really suffered the lack of safeguarding policies and procedures. There was absolutely nothing. In my club where I played, nobody knew, first of all, of what was, harassment and abuse, what behavior were acceptable and what behavior were not. If something happened, also we didn't know what to do, who to call. I mentioned earlier the vetting process. The coach that was coaching us, he didn't have the qualification he claimed he had. He had bad experiences in the past, but he was still able to coach there. And then after this club, he went on to another club where he abused other players. At the end, we were 4 victims to come forward in this case. Yes, so I would say the lack of there was just nothing in regards to safeguarding and child protection. And I think the education is really the key one, and for the kids, for the coaches, for the parents, because in my case, the bystander, what we call the bystander effect, was very strong. So many adults and other parents saw that they were things that were not really, they were quite strange, but they didn't do anything. And I think this is very much linked to a lack of understanding of what it is, the grooming process, what are the different forms of abuse and what are the symptoms. So I think education is really the I would say perhaps the number one thing.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I think we've had a few more questions come in. So how can sport and physical activity providers improve their risk management within safeguarding? Are there any quick wins that make it easy to digest and implement as to maximise impact in snowballing the process and save volunteers invaluable time? So improving risk management within safeguarding.
Yes, I was just rereading the question. Yeah, I think risk management and risk assessment has to become also the normal day-to-day. Whenever you take the kids to a tournament or to a training camp, you have to assess the risk. So you need to have a mechanism to do that. And this needs to be done on a very regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, that should be included in a lot of the training. I think that is something that is missing from a lot of safeguarding training, not just in sport, in organisations, but in education as well, is that how do you manage that risk? And it's that dynamic risk of an ongoing case being disclosed, and then it's obviously managing the long-term risks and the effects around that.
I'm working actually on developing a tool for football academies on how to assess those risks, in high performance environments. So I hope I can soon share it because I think it's missing also to have practical tools that you can use to assess risk in sporting environments.
Excellent. And another question, I'm not sure whether you can see that one, Mathilde. What do you find are the most common misconceptions when people discuss welfare and safeguarding, i.e. some people use the words interchangeably even though they are different? So that difference between welfare and safeguarding.
Yeah. There are a lot of misconceptions. As I said, there still needs to be a lot of education work on all sides. And there needs to be a real change of culture, and people need to understand also that, safeguarding goes almost beyond just making sure children are not abused and harassed in sport. It's about also making sure their rights. I was going to mention that earlier. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a very important international treaty on children's rights. So I think we need to be much more aware of that. How can we facilitate the children's access to those rights? How can we fulfill their potential in the best way possible? So to make sure that they become, well balanced and well-rounded individuals.
Thank you. I mean, we very much look at safeguarding as that umbrella term. It's far-reaching, and we talk about underneath that umbrella term, obviously, the welfare, well-being of the child, and noticing those small changes in behaviour that could possibly indicate something more sinister. So thank you very much. I can see that we are actually nearly out of time. Mathilde, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up this afternoon?
No, I think I'm fine. I hope I've answered more or less the questions.
If there are any questions that we haven't looked at or missed, as I said at the beginning, we will follow up on those. Mathilde, I want to extend a huge thank you to you today for coming on board, for sharing your story. I think you're absolutely inspiring, and it's fascinating to listen to. So I hope everyone out there has enjoyed it as much as I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me in this great webinar, and looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Safeguarding Podcast. For resources and more information about our safeguarding solutions, please visit thesafeguardingcompany.com. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe and feel free to rate us using whichever podcast provider you use.